right, let's look at 3, or C, the perversion of the ritual. Now, this is back in Romans chapter 2, verse number 25. Let's look and see what Paul says again. For circumcision verily profiteth if. Circumcision is profitable, but here's the condition. That's what if means. If thou keep the law. So if the one thing that you're worried about is circumcision, but you don't keep any of the rest of the law, look at the rest of the verse. If thou be a breaker of the law, thy circumcision is made uncircumcision. There were some Jewish leaders who were proclaiming that circumcision was some sort of a divine free pass. That if you just had the sign of circumcision, that you were okay. Just being a circumcised Jew guaranteed you an eternal home in heaven. So Paul is popping their bubble here, and he's stating that the ritual doesn't count for anything if there's no relationship to back up the ritual. And so this is very disturbing if you're one of those Jews who's been saying, I don't have anything to worry about as long as I'm a circumcised Jew. Everything's okay. And Paul's saying, wrong. No, that's not the case. If you are breaking the rest of the law, you're going to have a real big problem. And so that's the perversion of the ritual. It was they were thinking it was the relationship. They were replacing the relationship with a ritual. That's how they perverted it. All right, D, the paradox of the ritual. Verse number 26. Therefore, if the uncircumcision, we're talking about Gentiles here, keep the righteousness of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? In other words, if the Gentile who doesn't have the physical sign of circumcision in his body, but he is being obedient and sensitive to the will of God and allowing God to lead his life, doesn't that count for the same thing you're counting circumcision for? He's the guy that's demonstrating the relationship with God, which is what God originally wanted. God originally wanted you to have a relationship with him, and he only tells you to circumcise yourself as a sign of that relationship. So if you have a Jew or a Gentile over here who hasn't been circumcised, but he is living a relationship, covenant relationship with God like you're supposed to be, doesn't that count him as being circumcised? And so now they're pulling their hair out, and you've done it, Paul. Listen to what he's saying here. He says, you're going to find yourself in an awful pickle, but do you realize that it's possible for somebody who isn't circumcised to be more spiritual than you are, Jews? Wow. He's stepping on some toes, and you know it hurts when your toes get stepped on because they was wearing sandals. You know, they were just in sandals, so it's rough. He is really putting it on them here, the paradox of the ritual. Look at E, the provocation of the ritual. There'll be those among the Gentiles who almost stumble into obedience, and their innocent obedience will serve as a rebuke to the manipulative, hypocritical obedience to the letter of the law that these Jews were practicing. Well, let's look at point number 2. It's the importance of reality to prove ritual. The importance of reality to prove ritual. Verse 28 and 29. We'll take 2 points here. A, the outward appearance. Look at verse 28. For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision, which is outward in the flesh. Paul is declaring that many Jews are falsely identified as Jews. What do you mean? He's saying that you can't tell on the outside if they're a Jew or not. He's talking about a spiritual Jew. Being a Jew has to do with the heart, is what Paul is saying. And if this were written to Christians today, it might read like this. This is sort of a paraphrase of that verse. For he is not a Christian who is one outwardly, nor is that church membership which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Christian who is one inwardly, and church membership is that of the heart, in the spirit, not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God. That's a true statement that we can apply to church today. It's not our membership in the church that makes us a Christian. It's because we're a Christian that we can become a member of the church, you see. And so people, I went down to such and such church, or I go to this kind of a church, or I was baptized at such and such, or whatever, and they point to all these different signs. Well, that's a ritual. It's not the relationship. The relationship is what needs to exist first. And then look at B, the inward approval. We presented this as a new message to the Jews, but it really wasn't. This wasn't new to them. They may have forgotten it, but this concept was originally given by God. If you go all the way back to the Old Testament, to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 10, verse number 16. Look at this. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your, what's the next word? All right. That, I don't know. That's not exactly the place where I was thinking the foreskin was circumcised. Right? What are we talking about here? We're talking about a spiritual circumcision. We're not talking about a physical circumcision. So all the way back in the book of Deuteronomy, when God was giving the physical sign, he was also addressing that this isn't just supposed to be a physical sign. It's supposed to be a spiritual sign. You're my special people. You're going to be the ones who has a different government than anyone else who ever occupies earth. You're going to be led by minister leaders. There will be minister leaders who rule in your government. You're my special people. There's no way in the world that they could ever be what they were going to be if circumcision was just a physical sign. And so God addresses this all the way back in Deuteronomy at the installment of this, when the children of Israel have been led out of Egypt. And he rehearses this with them. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked. Colossians 2:11 in the New Testament. In whom also ye are circumcised with a circumcision made without hands. Well, it's impossible to do that physical circumcision without hands. So we're talking about spiritual circumcision here, and putting off the body of the sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ. It's a spiritual thing, not just a physical thing. So we mentioned in the weeks before that these people were proud of their heritage. It was three things, if you want to write them down. So Paul reminds them of three things. Number one, lineage will not save you. Lineage will not save you. Remember, they were so proud of their heritage, but that's not enough. He is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, Paul says. Number two, liturgy will not save you. And Paul said, neither is that circumcision, which is outward in the flesh. So the liturgy, the practices, the rituals, the way you practice your religion will not save you. And then law will not save you. It is the Spirit and not in the letter that saves. First of all, none of us can live in a complete obedience to the law. But the Jews at least were trying. But Paul says the law is not there to save you. It's there to condemn you. It's there to convict you. And so where they were trying to look at the law and say, there's got to be some way I can manipulate it just a little bit so I can find justification, and say that I'm living righteously. Paul says that's the wrong way to look at the law. That's not why the law is there so you can pat yourself on the back and say, look at all the rules I'm obeying. The law is there to show you how far short you are of what God demands and expects. So the law will not save you. Lineage, liturgy, and law. Three things that start with the letter L will not save you.